She slammed her bag down. She called the flight attendant twice, insisting the black man next to her didn't belong. And when that didn't work, she lied, accusing him of something unthinkable. Meredith Caldwell, a wealthy CEO, thought she could use her privilege to have Marcus Bennett removed from first class. But when he silently did one small act, the entire plane froze. Watch until the end and don't forget to like and subscribe. Meredith Caldwell strode through Los Angeles International Airport lax, with the air of someone who belonged. At 52 years old, she exuded the kind of confidence that came with decades of success. As the CEO of Caldwell Properties, one of the most recognized real estate firms on the West Coast, she had spent years building a name that commanded respect. Power wasn't just something she held. It was something she expected to be acknowledged the moment she walked into a room. Her designer heels clicked against the polished airport floor as she approached the first-class boarding gate. Her flight to New York JFK was a routine trip, meetings with investors, a luncheon with the city's top developers, and a stay at her favorite five-star hotel in Manhattan. Meredith only flew first class, not just for comfort but for the exclusivity it offered. She didn't just pay for legroom and fine wine. She paid to be surrounded by the right kind of people. As the boarding agent scanned her ticket, she gave the briefest nod of acknowledgement before stepping onto the jet bridge. First class was her domain, a sanctuary where she could sip champagne, glance through her emails, and enjoy the quiet hum of business class conversations. It was a place where everyone understood their place. But today, the moment she approached her row, her stomach clenched. A man was already seated beside her. A black man. Meredith's steps faltered, her designer carry-on pausing mid-roll as she took him in. He was dressed impeccably. A sharp navy blue suit, crisp white dress shirt, a subtle yet expensive watch on his wrist. The glow from his MacBook illuminated his focused expression as he typed, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. Meredith's fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. She knew this wasn't an error. She had picked her seat in advance, ensuring her usual preference, seat 2A, window side. But she hadn't anticipated him occupying 2B. Her lips pressed together in disapproval as she slid into her seat, setting her designer tote down with more force than necessary. The man beside her didn't acknowledge her presence. He remained focused, his posture relaxed yet composed. Meredith inhaled sharply through her nose, her annoyance bubbling just beneath the surface. This wasn't how first class was supposed to feel. It was meant to be predictable, exclusive. Instead, there was an intrusion, a disruption to the unspoken rules she believed in. She exhaled slowly, her gaze flicking toward the flight attendants. Someone must have noticed this. Someone must have realized the mistake. Because surely a man like him didn't belong here. Meredith Caldwell slammed her designer tote down onto the seat beside her, the sound deliberately loud against the soft leather. The man sitting next to her, Marcus Bennett, didn't even flinch. His posture remained straight, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keyboard of his MacBook, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line. He hadn't acknowledged her, hadn't even looked at her. That alone irritated her. She shifted in her seat, deliberately nudging the armrest between them, allowing her elbow to brush against his. Still nothing. Meredith exhaled sharply through her nose. This wasn't how first class was supposed to feel. It was supposed to be predictable, comfortable, exclusive. Yet here she was, seated next to someone who clearly didn't fit the image of first class in her mind. Her fingers curled into the seat's armrest as she looked around, half expecting a flight attendant to already be on their way to resolve what had to be a mistake. But no one was coming. Her patience ran out. She lifted her hand and called out, "Excuse me," Within seconds, a poised and professional flight attendant, Sarah Nolan, approached with a warm but neutral smile. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you?" Meredith nodded toward Marcus without looking at him. "I think there's been a mix-up with the seating." "Could you check, please?" Sarah, maintaining her polite demeanor, pulled out her tablet and tapped on the screen for a moment before looking up. "Mr. Bennett is correctly seated in 2B. You're in 2A. Everything matches the manifest." Meredith's expression barely faltered, though her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. "Oh," she said, forcing a light chuckle. "I just assumed, never mind." Sarah smiled and nodded. "Let me know if you need anything else." Meredith wasn't done. "Actually," she said quickly, stopping Sarah from stepping away. The flight attendant turned back, her patience evident but unwavering. "I'd like to change my seat." Sarah's brow lifted slightly, but her tone remained professional. "Is there an issue with the seat itself?" Meredith hesitated for half a second before lowering her voice. "No, I just prefer to sit elsewhere." Sarah nodded and checked her tablet again before looking back up. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class is at full capacity today." Meredith stiffened. "That couldn't be right. Are you sure?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Meredith's eyes flicked toward the rear of the plane. "What about economy?" Sarah hesitated before responding. "Yes, we do have open seats in economy." Meredith's lips curled slightly as she sat up straighter. "Perfect. Then he can take one of those." A heavy silence followed. Sarah's smile didn't waver, but her voice cooled. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's not an option." Meredith's face flushed. "Excuse me." Sarah met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "Mr. Bennett has a first-class ticket just like you. He will not be asked to move." Meredith's jaw clenched. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Meredith Caldwell sat rigidly in her seat, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. This was not how this flight was supposed to go. First class was her domain, her sanctuary, a place where people like her could travel in comfort without disruptions. Yet here she was, ignored, dismissed, and worst of all, being judged. She could feel it. The subtle glances from the other passengers, the quiet whispers, the barely concealed smirks. No one was on her side. Her fingers tapped sharply against the armrest as her anger swelled. How dare they dismiss her? How dare they act as if she were the one making a scene? If no one was going to take action, she would. With a sharp inhale, Meredith pressed the call button again. Ding. A few passengers sighed audibly this time. Others shifted in their seats, some openly turning to watch. Across the aisle, a man in a suit muttered something under his breath. Moments later, Sarah Nolan, the lead flight attendant, returned. This time, her professional smile was tighter, her eyes betraying a hint of restraint. "Is there something else I can help you with, ma'am?" Meredith sat up straighter, her voice lowered but sharp. "I need to report an incident." Sarah's brows knitted slightly. "What kind of incident?" Meredith paused deliberately as if gathering herself. Then she tilted her head slightly away from Marcus, as though the thought of even looking at him made her uncomfortable. Her voice came out soft, yet calculated. "He touched me inappropriately." Silence. The hum of the cabin disappeared. The murmurs stopped. Everyone froze. From somewhere behind them, a sharp inhale broke the stillness. A few rows ahead, a businessman slowly turned his head. Across the aisle, a woman lowered her magazine. For the first time since he boarded the plane, Marcus stopped typing. He closed his laptop slowly, resting his hands on top of it, and turned his head to look directly at Meredith. His dark brown eyes met hers, calm, unreadable, unwavering, not angry, not defensive, just watching. Sarah stiffened. She had been trained to handle difficult customers, to de-escalate tense situations. But this was different. This was an accusation. She took a steadying breath, her voice even. "Ma'am, could you clarify your statement?" Meredith exhaled, shaking her head slightly as though she were reluctant to even speak the words aloud. "I felt his hand touch my leg," she said carefully. "More than once." A few sharp inhales echoed through the cabin. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. He simply sat there, his posture relaxed, yet there was a tension in the air, something unreadable behind his calm expression. Sarah's gaze flicked to Marcus, but he offered nothing. The flight attendant hesitated for half a second before opening her mouth to respond, but a new voice cut through the thick silence. "Do you have proof, ma'am?" The question came from across the aisle. Heads turned. A middle-aged man in a blazer leaned forward, resting his elbow on his knee. "Excuse me." Meredith's voice wavered slightly. The man's expression remained neutral, but his tone was firm. "You just accused this man of inappropriate contact," he said. "That's a serious allegation. So, do you have proof?" Meredith's throat tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She expected sympathy, outrage, a swift removal of the problem, not this. Before she could form a response, another voice piped up. "I've been recording since she first called the flight attendant." A young woman, 2 rows back, lifted her phone slightly. "He hasn't done anything." Another wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Meredith's stomach churned. Sarah exhaled sharply, her expression now carefully neutral. "Ma'am," she said, her voice firmer this time, "I want to be very clear. Making a false accusation of this nature can have serious consequences." Meredith's breath came faster. She couldn't back down now. If she admitted she had exaggerated, she would lose. Lose control, lose her standing in this moment. So she lifted her chin and said the only thing left in her arsenal. "I don't feel safe sitting next to him." A few passengers scoffed audibly. One even laughed under their breath. Sarah's eyes darkened slightly, but her professionalism remained intact. "And why is that, ma'am?" Meredith's fingers tightened around her lap, forcing herself to look distressed. I just don't feel comfortable," she said, voice deliberately wavering. A low chuckle came from somewhere behind her. Meredith's cheeks burned. She could feel the shift. The power she had expected to wield so easily was slipping from her grasp. She turned slightly, scanning the cabin, searching for allies. She found none. Instead, she saw stares of skepticism, disbelief, some outright disgust. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just not going her way, this was backfiring. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't in years, a slow, creeping sense of fear. A heavy silence settled over the cabin. The weight of Meredith's accusation lingered like a fog, suffocating, undeniable. Every passenger in first class had heard it. Some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, uncertain of what would come next. Others were already exchanging glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to barely concealed amusement. Marcus Bennett, however, remained still. His hands rested atop his closed laptop, fingers relaxed, expression unreadable. He hadn't uttered a single word in his own defense, because he didn't need to. Slowly, with a measured ease, Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his navy blue suit. For the first time, Meredith's pulse skipped. She didn't know why. She had been expecting a protest, maybe some flimsy excuse, a desperate attempt to talk his way out of the trouble she had created for him. But there was no desperation in the way Marcus moved, only certainty. And then he pulled out a leather case. The moment he flipped it open, the entire first-class section froze. The gold emblem glinted under the soft cabin lights. The letters, FBI, stood out boldly, unmistakably. For a split second, no one reacted. Then the whispers started. Wait, what? Did she just accuse an FBI agent? Holy SHT. A man a few rows back let out a low chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. Meredith stared at the badge, her entire body going rigid. This wasn't possible. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Marcus tilted his head, his voice calm, controlled. "Would you like to file an official complaint, ma'am?" he asked, his tone carrying just the slightest edge of amusement. "I can take your statement right now." Meredith's face drained of color. Her throat tightened, fingers gripping the armrest as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. This was not how this was supposed to go. This was supposed to be her moment of control, her moment of righteous indignation. She had expected the flight crew to escort Marcus off the plane, or at the very least, remove him from her presence. Instead, she was the one being scrutinized. Across the aisle, the middle-aged lawyer who had challenged her earlier let out a quiet laugh. "This just keeps getting better." A woman 3 rows back had her phone lifted, her camera lens still aimed at Meredith. Sarah, the flight attendant, exhaled sharply, pressing her lips together before speaking. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I need you to clarify. Are you moving forward with this complaint?" Meredith's chest rose and fell unevenly, her breath suddenly too shallow. If she doubled down, if she pushed forward with her claim, she would be accusing a federal agent of misconduct on a plane. On record. Her career, her reputation, her entire life, it would all be on the line. The reality hit her like a freight train. Her fingers twitched in her lap. She could feel every set of eyes on her, watching, waiting, and Marcus never looked away. His badge remained open in his hand, unwavering. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and then finally she shook her head, barely a movement, just a slight tilt, a silent surrender. "No," she croaked. "No complaint." A few passengers snickered. Marcus gave a single nod as if he had expected that. He smoothly closed his badge, tucked it back into his suit, and reopened his laptop. And just like that, it was over, at least for him. But for Meredith, the nightmare was just beginning. The young woman holding her phone let out a quiet, satisfied hum. Then, with a small smirk, she tapped her screen twice. The video was already uploaded. Its caption: "CEO tries to kick black man out of first class, turns out he's an FBI agent." Meredith's stomach plummeted. The flight wasn't even in the air yet. And somehow she had already lost. Meredith Caldwell sat stiffly in her seat, staring blankly ahead, her chest tight with dread. The plane hadn't even landed, but she already knew her life was over. Her phone, tucked inside her designer purse, vibrated incessantly. At first she tried to ignore it, but after the third buzz, her fingers moved on their own, retrieving the device with a shaky grip. The screen lit up with notifications. "Meredith, is this you? What the hell did you do? Call me, now." Her pulse pounded in her ears as she tapped open Twitter, and then her stomach dropped. Her name was trending. The video had already racked up over 200,000 views and counting. She scrolled through the comments, each one hitting like a sledgehammer to the gut. Entitled "Karen Meets Instant Karma." This lady just ruined her whole life in 10 minutes. How do people still think they can get away with this? Meredith felt lightheaded. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But it was. The flight landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport, and Meredith bolted from her seat the moment the seatbelt sign turned off. She needed to get out, disappear, fix this before it got worse. But as soon as she stepped into the baggage claim area, she saw them. A group of reporters. Cameras, microphones. Her throat went dry. A woman in a sharp navy blazer held a microphone near her lips, reading off a phone screen. A viral video shows a woman attempting to have an FBI agent removed from first class. Her identity has now been revealed as real estate executive Meredith Caldwell. Meredith's breath hitched. One of the reporters looked up, and their eyes locked. "Wait, that's her." Meredith whirled around, heart pounding, shoving past a group of startled travelers. "Miss Caldwell, do you have a statement?" A camera flashed. She ducked her head, walking faster, nearly tripping over her own feet. She had to get out, had to escape this madness. Finally, she threw herself into the back seat of a taxi, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. "Go," she snapped at the driver. He barely glanced at her before pulling away. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. With a deep sense of dread, she answered. Meredith Caldwell, a clipped voice said. This is Richard Langley, chairman of Caldwell Properties. Meredith's stomach twisted into knots. Richard, I can explain. No, you can't, he cut in coldly. We need you to step down. This is not up for discussion. Meredith's fingers trembled around her phone. Please, Richard, this is being blown out of proportion. You humiliated yourself. You humiliated us. We cannot afford this kind of scandal. The call went dead. Meredith's hand slowly lowered to her lap, her career, her reputation. Everything she had spent decades building gone in mere hours. And the worst part, no one cared about her excuses. Meredith Caldwell sat alone in her dimly lit living room, her phone silent for the first time in hours. The notifications had slowed, but the damage was irreversible. Her name was still trending, her face plastered across every news outlet, her career shattered beyond repair. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, that her privilege, wealth, and status would shield her from consequences. But the world had changed. The internet never forgets. One moment of arrogance, one false accusation, and now she had become a cautionary tale. Marcus Bennett, the man she had tried to erase from first class, was still respected, still working, still moving forward. Meanwhile, she had lost everything. Because in the end, her power, her money, her influence, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth. And the truth was, she had been wrong. She just wished she had learned that before it was too late.